unlike manufacturing, our assets are people and our assets have feet and they can walk out the door anytime. If we don't present them with an atmosphere of opportunity, if we don't present them with an opportunity for growth, personally, professionally, and financially, then we're failing in our job as leaders. And I think private equity truly, in the distribution side of things, truly understands that and enhances that and invests in it.
Hi, I'm Benj, founder CEO of Proton AI, the AI-powered CRM built specifically for distributors. And you're listening to In the Mind of a Distributor, where we interview the smartest minds in distribution. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another episode of In the Mind of a Distributor. It is an honor to have Larry Stoddard here, an industry veteran who's been at publicly traded distributors, family-owned distributors, private equity-backed distributors, in COO roles, CEO roles, an incredible wealth of experience. So Larry, thanks so much for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Well, that's a very nice introduction. I don't live up to that, but I appreciate you having me.
Excellent. Well, let's jump right into it. I mean, you've worked across a spectrum of companies, public, family-owned, private equity-backed. Can you give us sort of a little bit of your history coming into distribution, how you found the world of distribution, and a little bit about sort of your experience across those different types of businesses?
Well, sure. Well, it's funny, Benj, how decisions you make when you're young have a life-changing impact. You don't really know much about it. I graduated from college. I went to Auburn, and I graduated in 1981. For many of the audience, is before a lot of people were born. And what you don't know is we've never seen a job market. I guess 08 and 09 or 09 and 10 might be moderate to some extent close to what we experienced in 1981. Inflation, interest rates were 16%, mortgages were 17% on houses, and nobody was hiring. And I did a series of interviews with companies. I graduated with a business degree. One of the companies that came to campus was a company called Ferguson Enterprises. And at the time, it was a small regional distributor of plumbing supplies. And they were based in Virginia, and they had places in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Oddly enough, what attracted me to them is the people that I met during the interview process. I really identified with. They were younger, they were aggressive, a lot of former athletes, that kind of stuff. I just identified with them really well. And fortunately enough for me, they were hiring, and very few people were hiring. And I didn't research much about distribution or much about that. I just wanted to get a job. They ended up giving me a job. Even more of a coincidence, again, decisions you make. When I first went to work for them, they had indicated that they wanted me to work for them in Birmingham. They were opening up a location in Birmingham, which was not far from Auburn. But I wasn't from Alabama or anything like that. I had to go interview with the president of the company at the time because back then he wanted to meet every trainee. And when I met him, he asked me to come work in Virginia. And I didn't know the impact of that decision, but the impact of that decision, which I think is a lesson today, particularly for the younger generation, being in Virginia around the leadership of the company, as opposed to being at a branch in Birmingham or in North Carolina, where you're around maybe a manager of the location, but not the leadership of the company, that visibility, that ability to interact with them and get to know them and learn from them, I think was inadvertently a very impactful part of my career.
What do you think the president saw? Why did the president invite you to come to the headquarters?
I thought they told me I had a job. And so I flew up to Virginia to I guess, just kind of get ordained by the leadership that says, okay. And when I got there, it was like 30 other guys and girls like me. And I go, holy cow, I was interviewing for a job. After they told me I had a job, I was apparently interviewing for a job. It was a great experience. When I interviewed, the guy that interviewed me, and people from the industry know, his name is David L. Peebles. He's widely known as the guy who built Ferguson to what it is today, the one that put all the architecture in place. And he interviewed me, and I went into his office, and he never asked, and if you guys could think back, you're young enough to remember, he didn't ask me about my grade point average. He didn't ask hardly anything about school. His first question, he said, tell me about your family. How many brothers and sisters? Tell me about where you grew up. Tell me about what you did. And he clearly didn't read my resume because, I played tennis at school, and he goes on this whole diatribe about how he doesn't like to hire swimmers or tennis players because they're individuals and they don't play team sports and they don't work well with others. And so after I told about my family, and he did his thing. He said, "So tell me, what are your interests in?" So, well, unfortunately, I play a lot of tennis. And he just laughed out, ha, 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 you know. But point of all this is I went to work at Ferguson Enterprises in Virginia, where the leadership of the company was, the people who were
Yep.
building that company. I got exposed to them. I saw them at work. I got invited to social events with them. And having that visibility, that interaction, I think set in motion something that probably couldn't have happened had I gone to work at a branch.
Yep. And you ended up as COO of the business
I ended up as COO of the parent company.
of Woolsey, right?
Wolseley bought Ferguson back in the early 80s. And for the longest time, they had really nothing to do with us. There was only one person in the US that had anything to do with us. Well, Ferguson kind of ran on its own. But when Charlie Banks became the CEO of Wolseley, the parent company, we were operating in about 17 different countries in Europe, plus the US and Canada. When he became the CEO of the company, we began a merging of Ferguson with Wolseley. And ultimately, all the people that were in the operational aspect, operational control of the business were from Ferguson, because Ferguson was, even back then, the largest, most important component of all. Wolseley was a $34 billion company. And at the time, Ferguson was probably making 75% of their earnings, right? It was just always a really important aspect of it.
What happened during that massive growth phase? I mean, when you joined, it was a regional business. 10, 15 years later, it's part of this like $34 billion company making up 75% of the revenue. Was it consolidation in the market? Like, what was the secret to growing that quickly?
Well, certainly acquisitions and integrations was one of the key components. We were a very aggressive acquirer. And not only were we an aggressive acquirer, this is back before private equity was kind of a big thing. It's the mid 80s, mid 90s, as private equity is just starting to come around. We were a company that was a trusted acquirer. They knew we were committed to the industry. They knew we were committed to the people, right? And they knew we were committed to growth and development of their people. And oftentimes an owner of a private company, they have they have some exits. They might have some children that are interested in running the business. They might know somebody that's willing to write a check, but that's kind of, those are difficult things, because even if you turn it over to your children, and as important as that is to do that, there's not a monetary exit, right? There's risk you're taking. We were kind of private equity before private equity was cool, right? And we were buying companies, integrating them into our system, and elevating and developing their people. And the probably the most extreme example of that is today, the CEO of Ferguson, a guy named Kevin Murphy, came out of an acquisition. He was a son of one of the owners. We met him when he was young. We said, wow, this kid's pretty sharp. We need to get him involved in the business. We got him involved with Waterworks. We got him engaged with the balance of the business. And he ultimately elevated to become the CEO, the largest distributor of plumbing and heating in the world. And he came from an acquisition. What I didn't realize at the time was I was witnessing, and I was experiencing how to roll up an industry that is very fragmented with a bunch of individual owners. Our competitors, our biggest competitors, even though Hughes was a huge company, Nolan was a big company at the time, still around the wind industries. There were a lot of companies that were independently owned, but our biggest competitor in every market was always the local guy. It was a relationship-driven business. So our only way to gather and gain momentum, become a company that had advantages in the market that others didn't have, was to continue to consolidate.
Okay, so you end up COO of Wolseley. You leave the company to go to Mueller Industries. Give us the sort of walk up through the getting into private equity, because clearly, like, you were doing these roll ups. Maybe it wasn't obvious at the time that this was going to be the model that you would follow, I guess, for the rest of your career. Sort of what came next?
Yeah. So, leaving Ferguson was a very challenging time in my life personally. I mean, because all of us were very good friends. I'd been there 28 years. It still is a very tight cultural company. I didn't want to compete with them. I wanted to either be in the industry where I could bring value to somebody, or I wanted my opportunity to do something. I had looked at private equity a few years previous to this. In fact, in a very little known fact, I had the contract on my desk to run Beacon Roofing Supplies back,
No way.
yeah, back in the early 2000s, which gives
How
you
big was Beacon then?
Beacon was about the fourth largest or fifth largest supplier of roofing supplies in the country at the time,
Yeah.
east of the
Yep.
Northeast Boston. And I went up and met them. It was owned by a private equity company out of Chicago, a company called Code Hennessy. And to give you some level set of my level of my capabilities and intelligence, they offered me the job. I ended up turning it down because I just couldn't imagine the thought of leaving all my friends at Ferguson. A few years later, the guy that did it, a guy named Bob Buck, made a bunch of money when it went public. So, it just gives you an indication of how much I know. But that was my first introduction to private equity. And I learned at that point that there was an industry out there that needed people who had experience in consolidating industries. They needed
Yep.
to have operational experience and understood the financials. And although you never really thought about yourself as an expert in those things, once you leave the hub or the home of Ferguson, you find out that you do know a lot. And then you're right, there's a list of people from Ferguson, with Chip, myself, Rob Marchbank, Darcy Curran. There's probably 24 people out there that are running companies as CEOs that came from that hub of knowledge and growth. And so, we didn't realize what we were learning, but we were learning a lot about consolidation and the how-tos and how to get it done.
As you think about doing roll-ups, like what are the market conditions that make for a good private equity backed or, a roll-up opportunity? I mean, Ferguson obviously was primed for it. Your experience at RelaDyne in a totally different market, similar story. Like what are the conditions that have to exist for that opportunity to be good?
Well, you need a fragmented industry, right? You need a fragmented industry that doesn't have definitive leadership from the distribution standpoint. What we had at RelaDyne was you had a very consolidated manufacturing base. There were 3 or 4 companies that made the product. There was ExxonMobil, there was Shell, there was Chevron, P66. So you had a very consolidated manufacturing base. You had tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of customers, and you had, I think the study said in 2002, some 17,000 distributors, mostly local owned, lifestyle kind of businesses. A lot of these businesses from at Ferguson, the plumbing and heating side, same thing at RelaDyne. These are businesses that are born out of World War II, where typically the men they came home from war and they started businesses. And they were little local jobbers. They'd take their pickup truck and deliver construction supplies, or in this case, lubricants, to the customers that needed it. And over time, they continue to build their business. Many of these are in second generation. And, I think the stats are third generation is literally like 3% of the companies. So there's a big drop, first generation, second generation, third is even a larger drop of successful companies. So there is this second generation and sometimes first generation looking for a way to monetize their work. And so you've got this hugely diversified and fractured base. You've got the need for customers to be able to work more than one market. Even though there's tens of thousands of customers, there's a group of customers that work both regionally and nationally that don't want to work with 35 different companies to do their job, right? They want one throat to choke, right? They need one person. So as you consolidate both regionally and nationally, you have a geographic advantage and you should have a scale advantage as you continue to do that. So the market conditions is fragmentation, the need for leadership, right? One, you got to have cash. It takes a decent amount of cash to do this, whether you get it from a bank, whether you use a private equity or venture capitalist group or a private investor, as long as you have the access to the cash, because you need that cash to be able to get the flywheel spinning and, to your point, get the aggregation and scaling.
There are obviously, in terms of bringing in outside capital to do these roll-ups, there are obviously examples of roll-ups that are done and like family-owned businesses, like Sonopar in the electrical space, for example, is some $30 billion in revenue with almost no debt. Is the reason you need external capital just about pacing?
You've got to have the money to be able to buy the companies, and then you got to have working capital for a period of time to be able to pay that off, right? You can generate it from the earnings of the business, but it limits the pace in which you can do this.
Yep.
Probably the biggest difference between private funding and private equity funding is the pace and the time frame. The private equity world, as a general rule, is looking for a 3 to 5 year exit. So, what we used to tell people when we were building RelaDyne is we're trying to build a 100-year company in 5-year increments. And, you have to You have to invest on the front end of a 5-year hold, pretty aggressively, so that as you exit 5 years hence, those investments have started to pay off and you're starting to see the benefits of those investments.
So do you think that that cycle is unnatural for a business?
Yeah.
In other words, sort of a business, if you're trying to build a 100-year business, like this sort of 5-year increment thing sounds like it could be a distraction. Like, did you ever find that? Or
Yes, I do. Absolutely. They pull at they pull at the fabric of what you're trying to build, because you're really trying to build culture, right? You're trying to build culture and capabilities and consistency. And that's a pretty compressed timeline to do that. You really need to have a balance of decisions that are very long-term in nature, and then some that are short-term that can fund your funding mechanism. So I tell people all the time, because people want to make it more complicated than it really is. They want to make it sound like it's, really a, Wall Street kind of model or formula, but it really isn't. These guys at their core, they're kind of like house flippers, right? They spend a lot of time studying markets, and they'll find, a city that has an opportunity for growth. They'll find a neighborhood that they think is a little better than the others that has upside gain based on demographics and data. And then they'll go in and they'll buy a bunch of homes, and they'll put some paint in them, they'll put some new appliances in, put some landscaping, and they'll have money invested, and they'll sell it for more than they invested because they have identified the opportunity and then executed the strategy to capitalize on it.
Most sales reps spend 72% of their week on admin tasks instead of actually selling. Proton changes that. We're a CRM built for distributors that guides your reps on who to call and what to sell. Our AI assistant Pronto even gives instant answers to questions like, what do I need to know about this account? Or which product should I pitch them next? Swish nearly tripled their growth rate by using Proton. You could too. Start by visiting proton.ai to learn more. Now back to the show.
And do you think that the sort of 5-year increments pushes you to do, as an executive, pushes you to do things you might not otherwise do? And have you seen that ends up working out better? Like, I could imagine in some scenarios, you're planning for 100 years, so you're like, well, I've got time, so I don't need to do much now. Versus if you've got a 5-year period, you've got to buy a certain number of business, you got to create a certain amount of value in that period. Like, there's a pressure or a pace that ends up, creating diamonds in some situations.
It is a challenging balance, and you've hit on it very well there. There's no question that I have made decisions at times on behalf of the business that I probably wouldn't have had I had a 15 or 20 year time horizon. But one of the advantages that private equity brings is complete alignment between the ownership and the management. And sometimes that sense of urgency helps drive behavior that maybe wouldn't have been there when you have more time. I think there's good and bad with it. When you think about it culturally, sometimes you move faster than you want to, and it creates a lot of anxiety and challenge for our folks. At the same time, it creates opportunity. So it's a double-edged sword. And I to be honest with you, I'm not smart enough to tell you if it's a net positive or a net negative. What I will tell you is, contrary to popular belief, private equity as a whole, as it relates to distribution, I can't speak to what they do in healthcare and retail and manufacturing, but as it relates to distribution, they have a great affinity and focus on making sure the people that are part of these companies have the opportunity for growth and are trained so that they can capitalize on those opportunities. Now, the leadership is the one that's going to drive that, but they get the importance of people in distribution. And in distribution, we used to talk about this at Ferguson. Unlike manufacturing, our assets are people, and our assets have feet, and they can walk out the door anytime. If you have a manufacturing facility and it's a fixed cost model, it's all about getting throughput to the factory. The equipment can't stop working. People can, and people can leave. And as people have important relationships, they have important influence in your local businesses and sometimes nationally. If we don't present them with an atmosphere of opportunity, if we don't present them with an opportunity for growth, personally, professionally, and financially, then we're failing in our job as leaders. And I think private equity truly, in the distribution side of things, truly understands that. and enhances that and invests in it.
Make that more concrete, especially in an environment where it's like a melting pot of cultures. Like you've bought a bunch of different businesses. Specifically, like what do you do to maintain the culture you're talking about?
Well, culture is not a sometimes thing. It's not a most time thing. It's an all time thing. And this is something I learned early on with Ferguson. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of conversations late at night, early in the morning. It's a lot of breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. I never went to a market where I didn't have breakfast, lunch, or dinner with customers and associates. And it's an investment in learning what's important to them and melding that with what is needed for the business and working together to accomplish it. So, as you think about what you do, I believe the biggest part of our job is to set examples and set expectations for the culture that the business needs to build. And when you're trying to meld them, to your point, the first thing you do is you do a town hall, and people do town halls all the time, and I'm sure some of them are very effective. But at the end of the day, what you find out is everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time, and they're exactly the same kind of people. I've walked into meetings at Ferguson where if people had a gun, they would have killed me, right? Because they hated Ferguson because that Ferguson was the big bad wolf, right? The same thing that happened at RelaDyne. They competed with us all the time, and when you walk in the door, but they don't know you. They don't know anything about you. They only know what people have said. When you sit there and you talk to them, like you and I are talking, they find out we all have the same exact problems. We all have the same exact challenges, and we're just trying to do the best we can to raise our family and be successful. And so when you start walking in and you have a humble message and you have a message of inclusiveness, you break down those barriers very quickly. And again, I'll tell you the patented line that I use all the time when we walk in day one, people are our most important asset. If you think about that logically, why would I start getting rid of the most important things the first day or any day?
Yep. That sort of speaks to the cultural side of things. When private equity gets involved on the technology side, how do private equity firms typically think about sort of technology decisions? Keep the same tech stack in place, change things out? How important is that to sort of the initial thesis, the ongoing thesis for buyers?
Well, as you know, the tech stack and the ERP is a critical piece of any business, and it is at the core of the operational efficiency of the business. And it also plays a big part culturally in the business. So if you have a business with multiple ERPs and your goal is to narrow it down to one or two, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, a lot of disruption. Ultimately, it will pay off, but it's not an immediate payoff kind of thing. So I would tell you, by and large, absent there being some expiration to some of your technology, a non-support of particular technology, at least in my experience in distribution, they try to avoid that entire revamping of it if they can. Now, in some cases you can't, right? I mean, we bought a company, they were operating on Quicken. I mean, the whole business is on Quicken, you can't do that, right? And not be, big time business. So I would say they do that very cautiously and very thoughtfully because that's a longer term play, and it's a very distracting activity and very
integrating the ERPs.
Yep. It's a very I tell people all the time when I go, I say, listen, I don't know what the date is, but we're going to come in and we're going to change your operating system. And here's what you're going to know about it. We're going to train you, 60 days out, 30 days out, week out, go live. We'll be sitting there not side by side. You'll be ready to go on day one. And the first time a customer orders, you won't be able to write up a ticket. And by the end of the first week, you're going to say things like, this is the worst thing this is the worst system I've ever seen. I don't know how they even stay in business. They're horrible. By the end of the first month, you'll say things like, well, it's not horrible. It's just not good. And by the end of the third month, you'll say, hey, I don't know how we operate on our system. And the one thing that is constant with all that is both the timing and the fact that I will not be here between day 1 and day 90. Because I don't need people to tell me they don't like me. I have plenty of them doing that. And if I come during that period, you're not going to like me. I will wait till it's over before I show up.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to pivot to talk about sort of operational cadences, especially comparing the operational cadence that exists in sort of the operational excellence required in a private equity-backed business versus a family-owned business. Like, you've been in both environments, and you've obviously seen a lot of family-owned businesses and a lot of private equity-backed businesses. What's different? What do private equity backed businesses bring in terms of rigor? And what does that look like? And what do family businesses bring in terms of long-term outlook and things like that?
Well, the answer is it always depends, again, because I've seen a lot of privately held businesses that are better than any business I've ever seen in operation.
Yep.
They're so tight, they're so structured, it's amazing. And private businesses, as private equity businesses, come in all flavors. But as a broad brush, as a broad statement, typically there's a lot more flexibility and leeway in privately held businesses because they aren't held to public company standards. That's one of the advantages of being private. You can do what you want to do, how you want to do it, when you want to do it, right? Private equity businesses, as a general basis, tend to operate not exactly like, but more like publicly traded businesses than private businesses. And the operational rigor and operational discipline required is significantly higher as a general statement than privately held businesses. And that's challenging to enact as you're putting together multiple cultures and all of a sudden change management around operating systems and culture. People are, as a general rule, resistant to change. And so I used to do it this way. Now you're making me do it this way. And it seems stupid because I still got to the same end. But in order to truly get operational leverage through your operational discipline and rigor, you have to do things the same way. It's taken me a long time to figure this statement out, but you don't have to do it the best way. You just have to do it the same way. And once you get doing it the same way, once you've got that rigor, you can improve it.
So say more on that. Is that like the same way in terms of sales process, sales reporting, the same way in terms of like what are the pieces that are critical that need to be the same?
You have to receive material the same at the dock.
Yeah.
You have to do order entry the same.
The basics. You got to do the basics.
Business, right? The operational system ops, PsyOps of the business have to be the same. And it doesn't matter if you're in Seattle or you're in Atlanta or you're in Houston or you're in New York. You should be able to take an associate and plug them in, and they should be effective day one. Think of like a Walmart model or a Publix. You think the cashier in Publix can go from Lakeland, Florida to Atlanta and be a cashier? Of course they can, because it's the same system, same way, right? That operational rigor, that operational discipline is critically important. But because wholesaling has so much variability to it, it's a difficult thing to achieve. You don't want perfect to get in the way of good, right? You don't have to do it the best way. You don't have to do the most efficient way. You just have to do it consistently the same way, and then you can improve upon that.
What's the impact sort of on this sameness on the sales side of things? I mean, I feel like sales and distribution has a reputation for being very much a cowboy, especially on the outside. So the idea that you're going to make all these cowboys do the exact same thing sounds crazy. What's the impact on the sales side?
It's very hard, and it is a relationship business. I don't have a silver bullet or an answer, but what I will tell you is over time, what I've learned is if you think about a continuum, on this side of the continuum is relationship, and on this side of the continuum is data. I don't want to move all the way over here, but I want to move towards it so that my cowboys that are out there are using consistent information so they can make better decisions. Most of us, and I include me in that statement, we depend so much on our experience and our gut to make decisions. When we have tools at our disposal that can enhance our abilities and make us more profitable and make us, quite frankly, more successful on a financial standpoint.
Do you think that's going to change over time? Like 10 years out, 20 years out, do you think that we'll see more of a move towards data versus relationships in the sales side of things?
I do. There's been articles out there. I can't cite a particular one, but I've seen some articles. Is this the death of the outside salesperson?
People have been predicting the death of the outside salesperson for forever. Since the first outside sales rep made their first call in ancient Egypt or whatever, someone said this is the end of the outside sales rep.
As access to information and speed to information gets more and more accessible, I think that tears at some of the capabilities and requirements of an outside salesperson. Do I think relationships ever going to go away? Never's is a big word. I do think the dependency on the relationship will evolve, and the speed to information and access to information will be achieved in other methods. Certainly, there's some combination of technology and access to information and interpretation of information that we need to get to. Think about an industry expert in HVAC. There's only so much you can look up or chat GPT on how to fix, a train commercial unit, where someone who's been there and has done this for a long time can look at it and say, this is the problem.
I think that's changing though. I think in the next 5 years, AI is going to accelerate the shift you're talking about.
Over time. But my point is, there was a date and time, Benj, when they had to physically be on site to do this.
Right.
At least now they don't have to be on site. They can do it through a video call. I mean, they can use their phone and say, here's the picture of the inside of the unit. What do you think? So it's making those true industry experts more useful and more effective.
Okay, quick fire round here. What's one myth about private equity you'd love to debunk?
I would say that, at least in distribution, they don't come in and wipe all the people out. All the movies, they come in and they wipe out the whole town. They don't do that. They care about the people. They want to see them succeed. I can't speak to manufacturing, but in distribution, I have never gone in and wiped a bunch of people, ever.
What's the single deal that taught you the most?
It's not a particular deal. It's more about learning how important legacy is, community is, and people are to the privately held businesses. I tell people all the time, and I say this with great respect, I tell them, when someone like me or someone like us comes in, it's like you having your first child. To you and your wife, or you and your spouse at the time, the most important day of your life is this child. But to the doctor delivering it, it's Wednesday. And that guy or girl has to get home to dinner. They have kids that have to get to sports. It's just Wednesday to them. For me, it's Wednesday. And I try to explain that to people.
One thing we really value at Proton is curiosity. After a long and successful career in distribution, what's one thing you still don't have a good answer for or are still trying to figure out or learn?
There's a host of things I don't know. There's a thimble of things that I do know. People say, is there a silver bullet? And I always say there's not. I absolutely disagree with distribution. There is a silver bullet, and that is having high quality, intelligent people who care. That will make your business significantly more successful. Oftentimes people are scared to hire intelligent, capable people because they don't want to be challenged, right? But that's the exact wrong thing. What I will say that I've never been able to figure out is businesses, even though they're similar, vary by geography. They vary by the products they sell. And so there's no one formula to say, I need to have this cost infrastructure. I need to have it done exactly this way and then duplicate it. Even though as much as I say I want to duplicate what we do everywhere, it's extremely difficult to do that. And I've never been able to achieve it. There's always variations. So I think that's a really challenging piece, is to get that operational discipline and rigor that needs to be there for you to optimize your structure.
Yep. The how hard it is to make that happen.
So hard. It's so hard.
Yeah. Larry, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really, really appreciate it.
Listen, great seeing you. Both jealous and admire your success. I think you're doing a great job in all the things that you've been involved with. We've been very successful with working with some of your businesses in the past. They've been very helpful for us. So thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. That's it for this episode of In the Mind of a Distributor. If you like this conversation, leave a review. It helps more folks in distribution find the show. If you're thinking about a CRM for your business, head to proton.ai to see how Proton can help you grow faster. Or if you want to connect with me, you can add me, Benj Cohen, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.